Welcome back, everybody. My name is Tim Hepworth here with Fly Fishing Bover Outfitters and Thursday Night Live Fly Tying, and we are here for another quick tie. We want to thank Western Canada Fly Fishing Guide School for sponsoring it for you guys tonight. We are going to be tying up a fun little streamer today out of Season 6, Episode 9. This is the Muddy Buddy Streamer. We'll get to that in a second here, but you can see it there on the screen. It's not super complicated, but there's a little bit of things in here that could go wrong, so we'll take you through it the best we can. I'm going to be tying out of my Season 6 kit. Looks like this. If you are as well, just go ahead and grab the appropriately marked package. Should say Episode 9 on it. If you're tying out of our individual kits, nothing changes. All the material's there for you, just the same as it is in these kits. And if you don't have one of our kits, that's fine. Just head on over to our website and you can get the full fly recipe right there and tie along with us as well. Don't forget to like and subscribe to this video. Hit that little bell icon. That'll let you know next week when we have a couple more flies coming out as well. Okay, let's head on over to the vise and take a look at this guy. So we've got a few materials we're going to be working with today. Probably the most challenging one is going to be the deer hair right at the very end. The rest of it's fairly simple, but when we get there, things can go wrong, and they did go wrong for me earlier today too in a few practice runs. So, but if you kind of follow the steps I'm going to give you, you should be just fine. So let's go ahead and get this popped out of the vise. Let's get our next hook in. We also on this fly are using a cone head, okay, this cone here. So should be fairly self-explanatory, but you do want the cone to sit with the narrow part of the cone pointed towards the eye, like so. Let's go ahead and get that in our vise. Now, this is, you really could weight this fly or have it unweighted. I would suggest at least a bead or a cone at the front. I am going to use a little bit of lead wrap. Now, this isn't for weight. This is just to seed that, that cone a little better. So if I just take off a little piece here, it might be a touch long. I'm just going to snip that down a little shorter. I just want to get a few wraps in because this is going to slide up inside that cone, and it's actually going to help it sit more level because right now it's really floppy. So if I add this lead wrap, or lead-free, whatever you have or whatever you want to use, works quite well. Grab your buddy's scissors because you don't want to use your own good scissors to cut that stuff. Make sure that those ends are pushed right down tight so they're not kind of sticking up anywhere. And then all I'm going to do is, as I push that, I'm going to lift that cone up. I'm going to push it right up into the head of the cone and make sure it's seated as hard as I can in there. So you can barely see it, but what you can see is that it keeps that cone nice and level for me. Now I'm going to go over to my thread. I'm using some UTC 140 in a dark brown. Black would be perfect for this fly. Had the brown already set up. But we do need a little bit heavier thread here because we are going to be spinning deer hair right at the very end of this fly. So I'm going to come in and slide my thread right up against those lead wraps, and I'm going to put in quite a few wraps right behind it because I want to make sure that those lead wraps aren't going to move on me. And then I can kind of position my cone in the angle that I want. Tip it down just a smidge more. Just like that, should be good. And now that shouldn't be able to move on you at all. So that's the joy of the lead wraps up in the cone. Go ahead and trim that tag end out. We're gonna take some thread wraps all the way down, nice touching wraps, all the way down to the bend of the hook. But before we quite get to the bend, we're gonna put in one material, then continue the thread to the back. So in your kits, you're gonna see a whole bunch of this red crystal flash. I want you to grab one really full strand, like a really long one, because they're all quite long. Grab a full strand. I want you to match up the tips of the strands, and we're actually going to cut this down a couple times in half. So once I get that first one, you can see my tips are lined up. I'm going to go down and find the bottom portion of it, and I'm just going to snip it just like that. And then I'm going to make sure I hold on to those two tips, and now I'm going to get the other two tips. So we're just going to repeat the process. This can be a little finicky in the hand to do, but we want to get all the tips lined up, and we're just going to cut it in half one more time, and that should give us 8 pieces of flash. So now I'm going to go down and find each of those bottom of the valleys and snip them. And now I should have 4 strands in the front, 4 in the back, and I'm going to fold this around my thread once I find that midpoint. I'm just going to fold it around my thread right at that point so they're as even in length as possible. Make sure I kind of have them pinched like this together. I'm going to lift my thread straight up and then just pull them down right on top of the hook shank. And then from that position, I'm just going to take a few thread wraps back, right about to where that barb on the hook is. Okay, so I got those secured. I can let them go. At this point, what I'd like to do is just check them. Actually, not too bad. They're quite even, so I'll just leave those as they are. If we need to trim them at the end, if they're a little long, we can, but those look good. Okay, now the next kind of main material that we're gonna be working with in this one is some rabbit zonker. Okay, so you got a really big long strip. I've just been leaving it in one strip as I tie it, because we'll just tie in from the back. So you'll see at the front is where the fur starts, and it's all angling backwards. And then when you get back here, you can see the fur is kind of coming off that leather patch that it's on. So what I want to do is I want to measure the leather portion. Okay, so I got the kind of the dark leather right here. I'm going to measure that right to the hook eye off the back of the bend, and that's where I'm going to transfer that and then roll it forward. That's going to be the length that I'm going to use. How far it's going to be hanging off is going to be determined by that. Okay, but before I can tie this in here, I got to kind of dig down between those materials. If you put a little bit of moisture on your fingers, lick your fingers, you can pull that apart and get right down to basically what we'd call that leather portion at the bottom. Okay, once I get that kind of found, I'm gonna tie it in right there. Get a little more moisture on that, try to hold it out of the way. Once I found that spot, take my thread up and over. It's gonna do a couple of loose wraps over top so I can reposition it because I want it to be perfectly right up on top, and then I'll pull down on that bobbin. Now I'm gonna take a few more, because right here I do not want this to roll on the hook shank, so I'm gonna take a few more thread wraps, make sure it's good and tight, and I should be left with something that looks like that. Okay, so it's tied in right there. Now I'm gonna pull this back out of the way because we don't need it for a second. I've just got like a simple little hair clip here. You could even use this wire or this lead wrap. You could just wrap around the hook shank, whatever you want, just something to pull this out of the way. So it's back there. Okay, now the next thing we're gonna do, or the next material we're gonna put in, is we have some cactus chenille. Okay, so we got this stuff in your kit on a long strand as well. It's also kind of tied in on like a little center rope. So I'm just gonna pull a few of the fibers off and expose that white rope that's on the inside. And that's what I'm gonna tie in here. I'm gonna tie it in right as tight as I can to that zonker. Make sure it's good and secure before I start wrapping it. And then I can move my thread forward. I'm gonna move my thread forward, and now this is where, in this fly, some of the tricky parts of this is leaving yourself enough room up at the very head of the fly to get that deer hair spun. So we don't really wanna crowd too much, so I'm gonna leave my thread back just a little bit. I'm gonna start wrapping that forward, and as I do, I'm kind of pulling those fibers back so that they stack nicely and stand up. So you can see I'm just kind of pruning them backwards. Because this material doesn't really get seen a ton on the underside, but we want to take advantage of it being there the best we can, and not just do a nice open spiral. We want to have a good amount of it in here. And once I get to my thread, I'm going to tie that off. Thread wrap behind, thread wrap in front as always when we're securing those materials, and then I can trim it out. Set that aside. Make sure that's good and secured. Then I'm gonna take my clip off of here, and I'm gonna bring this rabbit zonker forward. So now I wanna tie this in basically right where I've left my thread. So I kinda gotta find that point again. Now another good way to do that is you can go in here with a bobbin, or sorry, a bodkin, basically a needle, like so, and we can just kind of run it along that fur and separate that fur out so we can kind of get, in one shot almost, get right down to where we want to be. Add that moisture again. And that gets us right down to that leather patch pretty quick. So same thing we did in the back. I'm just going to take a couple of loose wraps to hold it in place. And then I'm going to give a good pull down on my bobbin, make sure that's secured. Now this one, because we are going to cut it out at this point, I really got to make sure that this is tied in and it's not going to go anywhere. So I'm taking a few extra wraps, really tighten it in, and then I'm going to lift it up, take a few thread wraps in front, and then I can trim that out. About as close as we can, like so. And then all I want to do is, because I'm going to have a little bit of a kind of butt end tag there, I just want to make sure, I'm going to trim just a little bit more out of it. Because like I said, we really don't want to bulk up at the front of the fly here. We want to make sure we're gonna use it to our advantage. There we go. Take a couple thread wraps over top of it so it's not gonna go anywhere. So we basically left ourselves a bit of a gap here at the front, and this is where we're gonna be placing our deer hair. So we got one more material to put in before we can do that though. We got some of these rubber legs pre-cut for you, these barred legs. So right now this is 2 together, so I'm just gonna pull them apart, if they'll cooperate for me. And we're gonna tie in one of these sections on both sides. You really don't wanna come apart. There we go. So you got 2 of them, you're gonna put 1 on each side. Okay, so I'm gonna do kind of the same thing when I tied in that flash. I'm gonna fold it around my thread, and I wanna match up those tips so they're the same length. And then I'm gonna come up and over, and I'm gonna tie this in right on the side here where I left that thread. So I want these to be right on the side of the fly. So I tie in those ones on the far side. And I'm gonna do the same thing on my side of the fly. On the near side here, I'll do the same thing. Match up those tips. And secure them down. So now you should be left with something looks like this. Okay, so we've got those rubber legs coming off both ends, coming down both sides laterally. Then I'm just gonna advance my thread forward. I'm gonna put a few thread wraps now up over top of that lead wire. And basically in this little gap that I've left myself, which is almost down to the bear hook, I'm just gonna leave my thread right there, and I'm gonna start working with this deer hair. I'm gonna grab this clip again just to hold all this stuff back out of the way. Now, you got a little patch here. You really don't need a ton of this deer hair, okay? So I would say you want about a pencil width. Why we use that as a measurement, I'm not all that sure, but we're gonna grab roughly a pencil width. So you need to imagine that we're gonna be putting on an entire collar. So we need enough, so I'll show you this guy here. So the collar is gonna go all the way around. So we need to make sure that when we spin this, we have enough hair that's gonna go completely around everything we've done so far. So go in, grab a clump that you think's close to the right size. Remember, grab a little more than you think because you are gonna be pulling out some of the fibers that are underneath it when you clean it out. So I've got what I want here. I'm gonna come in here, trim it down by the patch kind of as close as I can. Like so, okay. Now I'm just kind of keeping it oriented in my hands. I'm gonna hold the tips. I'm gonna try to clean out any of that under fur that might be in them. You can comb it out as well if you've got a comb nearby. But this hair actually doesn't have a ton of under fur in it, so that's good. But still holding it now, I need to put this in a hair stacker. So I've got my stacker here, put it in tips first. Make sure you get all the tips in there. I'm gonna wrap it on the table a few times. And when I pull off the base of this, I wanna have the base down towards the back of the fly so that, there you go, all my tips are lined up. Now, reach in and grab them, hold them good and tight. I'm gonna switch hands, just kind of double check, make sure there's not any extra stuff coming out there, good. And now I'm gonna come in here, guys, and this is where it gets fun. So don't worry, if when you put this on and you go to flare it doesn't work, just abandon that hair, go recut some more, okay? But basically I want this collar to extend just back over top of that rabbit fur. Okay, so somewhere in there. I'm gonna switch hands. Get that out of the way for a second. And then I'm gonna kind of start to work this hair down a little bit and around. This just kind of helps me get a jump start on that initial spin. So I'm gonna take one wrap. I'm gonna start to pull a little bit of tension. I'm gonna take a second wrap, start to pull, and you can see the hair already wants to turn. So all I'm gonna do is I'm gonna allow it to start to turn, take a third wrap. I'm gonna pull tight. Don't pull so tight that you actually break your thread, because then you're really out of luck. I'm gonna look around, make sure I got full coverage on anywhere. In this position, you can still kind of move that hair around, which is kind of nice because I'm still holding tension on my bobbin. So if there's any spots that look like they were a little sparse, I'll just kind of rotate a little bit of the hair into that position. I'm gonna take now one wrap as I'm moving forward, just trying to work myself through the hair. And then I'm gonna pull all of that hair back and get some thread wraps just ahead of it. Right up by that cone. And once we trim this hair, all that hair kind of sits back against the comb, because I can pull it, or against the cone, I can pull it back, but as soon as I let go, it kind of sits back forward, and that's the desired effect. So I'll take a few wraps right behind the cone. Then I'm gonna come in here with my whip finish tool, and I'm gonna whip finish right behind the cone. Just try to sneak that thread in behind there. You're gonna definitely wanna do a couple of 3 or 4 turn whip finishes just because we can't get really in there with glue. So we wanna really make sure that this is a good knot. Do it a couple times. There we go, I'm happy with that. Pull it down. We can trim out that thread. And now I'm gonna head on over to my razor blade. So this is definitely a lot more easily done with a razor blade if you don't have one. Scissors could work, but this is definitely gonna be easier with a razor blade. I've just broken this in half. And now I'm gonna use basically the shape of the cone to do my trimming, and I'm just doing little touches. I'm not overly doing it at any point. I don't wanna take off too much hair at once, and I don't wanna cut into my collar. So if I cut into my collar, I'm basically, everything I've just done was kind of pointless, and I'll have to do it again. And I also don't wanna cut my rubber legs, which are sitting just behind that collar. So I'm just gonna do little touches, brush the hair out of the way. Like I said, I'm just using that shape of the cone to kind of brace that razor blade. And just be careful not to take too much, because once you take it off, you can't put it back on. And if that collar's standing up nice and tall, don't be fearful of that if it looks like it's standing out too prominent, because as soon as water hits that, it's gonna pull it right back against the fly. So I got just a little bit more I wanna do right here. There we go. Just little touches around. There we go. Pretty happy with that. Don't overthink it. As long as you got a collar in there, you've got hair coming back up against the cone, that's what we're looking for. And that is, my friends, the Muddy Buddy. Great little streamer that you would be amazed at how much movement you get out of that tail, all this rabbit fur, although the downside being that it's a little bit heavy in the water, a little bit heavy to pick up because it doesn't shed water super well. In the water, you really can't beat the action that this fly gives you. Okay guys, my name is Tim Hepworth, here with Fly Fishing Bover Outfitters and Thursday Night Live Fly Tying. I want to thank you for joining me for this quick tie from Season 6, Episode 9. Don't forget to like and subscribe to this video. Hit that bell icon. You'll see next week when we have a couple more flies coming your way. Okay, thanks again, guys. We'll see you soon.